Shabbat Shalom, everybody. I'll tell you, it is a great, great feeling in life to be needed, is it not? Most of the time. But frankly, not always. 2 weeks ago, on a Sunday evening, I called in. I went in online. Monday, they said, don't come in. Monday night, I did the same thing. I went online. Don't come in. Tuesday night, don't come in. Wednesday night, show up. Now, some of you may have already figured out what I'm speaking about. It's jury duty. Ho! Jury duty, which is, of course, a civic duty. So let me describe to you the scene on Thursday morning. I showed up. There were about 150 people. This is the Superior Courthouse in Van Nuys. And second floor, which is the jury waiting room, was very comfortable. It was 98 degrees in Van Nuys, and the air conditioning was not working. But don't worry, the windows opened. In any case, they called 50 people upstairs to one room. They called the other 50 people upstairs to the other room, and I'm thinking, well, it's looking like whatever. And then they said, we got one more case we need some alternate for, so they called up 10 of us. When we went upstairs, the judge said to us, it's likely, by the way, we just want you to know, most cases are typically 3 days, but it's likely that this one's going to be at least 2 weeks or so and take you to the end of the month. They immediately dismissed 3 of the jurors, leaving the other 7 of us. And it works like this. Those of you who have experienced this know, but it works something like this. They ask you your name, if you're married, your spouse's name, your occupation, if you have children, their occupation, and the like. So when it came to me, I mentioned all these things, an occupation, well, I'm a rabbi. And the judge said, forgive me, Rabbi, for not addressing you properly when you came in. And I said, thank you, Your Honor. Now, rabbis are generally, I'm told, and clergy in general, is not selected very frequently for a jury. The first or second question asked to me by the defense attorney as he was interviewing me was, are you ever asked in your work to mediate disputes? I said, well, occasionally, you know, I am. People will call in with issues of moral questions, or they're dealing with a business situation, or they just want to know the right thing to do. But more often than not, it's family issues, family disputes. To which the defense attorney said, well, do you feel that after you've heard one argument from one side, that when the other party then comes in to give you their side of the argument, you can be fair? And I said, well, I try to live by, there's a teaching in the Talmud that says you're supposed to always have both sides present when there's a dispute. And therefore, I try very hard to have both parties in the room when one is disputing the other. To which they said, that's a Talmudic law? And I said, it is. And the judge perked up. And for the next few minutes, we had discussions about Jewish law at the Van Nuys courtroom. Well, I was selected, but not as an alternate. They put me on the case. They tossed one of the other 12 jurors off, and off we went. I want to share some observation about my experiences in court with you, and then some thoughts about Judaism and judges and justice and witnesses and the like. And the first thing I want to share with you, and many of you know this, is that when you're ever paneled on a jury, you are asked not to talk about the case, even among your fellow jurors. And I was very impressed that in my experience, not one juror spoke with another. Every 15-minute break, people didn't speak about it. When they all went to lunch together, I didn't go to lunch with them. I was working on a sermon. this sermon and two others because I didn't know if I'd be able to talk about the case until the last minute. But they really, really did not discuss the case. By the way, just parenthetically, in our Eyes on Wise, our weekly email, another topic yesterday was noted that I'd be speaking about memory. And I had planned on that. I was ready for that in case, but the case settled. We made a decision late yesterday, which just allowed me to spend last night and a good part of the day putting my thoughts together. I wanted to share it with you while it was fresh in my mind. So that's why this. So the first thing I was impressed with is the fact that people really followed the judge's directives not to talk about it. I was impressed with the protocols, the respect for the court, the respect for the system. Everybody showed up on time. And when the jury would walk in the morning and come back for breaks, everybody stood up. The plaintiff's judges, the defendant's judges, the defendant himself, everybody. And I wish, and then the judge walked in, and I guess the protocol is not to stand for him, although I thought it would have been nice. And regarding the judge, he was poised, he was thoughtful. I thought the way he handled objections, overruled and sustained, was just interesting, and I was just very enamored with it. By the way, one point I realized, and I didn't realize it until maybe the fourth or fifth day, when you're about to give testimony, you are asked the following: do you solemnly state that the testimony you are about to give in the matter pending before this court, something like that, shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? But I noticed that it didn't say, do you solemnly swear? It said, do you solemnly state? And that, I think, is interesting. In any case, during the trial, which included 9 days of testimony, it really was an impetus for me to reflect on Jewish law and American civil law and a lot of other things. So I want to share with you some thoughts. The first is, it's actually a commandment in Judaism to set up a court. A Jew is not allowed to live in the city unless there is a Jewish court that is arranged. This goes back to the book of Deuteronomy, where God tells Moses that you shall appoint judges and officers in all of your gates, which God is giving you. And that commandment, by the way, includes communal responsibility to appoint a Sanhedrin, which precedes the establishment of every other court. There are 71 judges. God commands Moses, also in the book of Numbers in this case, to create a Sanhedrin that included 70 people, plus Moses himself, 71. Who then, though, is qualified to be a judge? What are the qualities necessary to adjudicate? If we had time, I'd ask you what qualities you think, but I'll share with you what Maimonides says. First of all, the judge needs the quality of wisdom. Now, it's not always easy to ascertain if someone has wisdom, but that was one of the qualities. The judge had to be learned in Torah law. Well, of course, you can't adjudicate appropriately if you don't know the law. Interestingly, the person had to be well-versed in other aspects, such as medicine, astronomy, astrology, and even the superstitious practices of what they called idol worshipers, so that you could judge them appropriately. In other words, the judge had to be worldly. It wasn't enough just to be steeped in Torah law. You had to understand secular ideals, secular thinking, and secular teachings. You couldn't be too old. You were also not allowed to be too young. You have to be 40 years old to be on the court, which is interesting. I don't know if anything else. Well, there are a few other things in Judaism you're supposed to wait for. That's one of them. And you have to have had a child. Interestingly, I think people who have children know that your views tend to be affected once you've had children. And the judge had to be known to be well-spoken. There was also a lesser Sanhedrin with 23 judges. And of course, there are standard rabbinical courts with 3 judges. By the way, things that would immediately disqualify you: if you were a gambler, if you are a usurer, that's someone who loans money with interest. If you were someone who races pigeons, that too would disqualify you. And if you were a trader of produce during the sabbatical year. However, if you stopped doing those things and you changed your ways, you were now eligible to be a judge. A couple of other things. A judge is not allowed to handle a case if it's related to someone he knows or he has a personal relationship. And the judge had to be scrupulously fair, could not depart from Torah principles of guilt or innocence. In other words, the Torah had to guide the decisions. You, of course, need a minimum of 2 witnesses. One is not enough. It's true for civil matters, it's true for criminal matters, and it's true for religious matters. So any of you who have seen a ketubah being signed know that there is a minimum. You always have to have 2 witnesses. Throughout this particular case, there were 2 teachings of Judaism which not only didn't only guide judges, but I think they're supposed to guide all of us in the way we go through life and in the way that we look at cases, both personally and civilly. I want to share with you both of them. A judge may not favor one of the litigants in a trial and must maintain absolute equality before the law. If one litigant is a man of high rank and distinction, the judge must not afford him any special honor or treat him with more deference or respect. Similarly, though, a judge must not decide in favor of poor people because of pity and compassion for them. Despite the temptation to render a verdict that would allow the poor to receive money from the rich who might not even miss it, you cannot pervert the law regardless of how admirable the purpose. Justice is supposed to be rendered with impartiality, whether the person is rich or poor, sinner or saint. In other words, sometimes in life, compassion and justice are at loggerheads. Often in life, it's the case. And the tradition is teaching us that of the 2, justice is what we're supposed to serve. You all know the line in Hebrew in the Torah, tzedek, tzedek tirdof, justice, justice you shall pursue. And I couldn't help but think, the symbol of justice, often called Lady Justice, the woman holding the scales, is wearing a blindfold because it doesn't matter who's on the scales. The way we demonstrate the justice must be done objectively. And that today, I believe, is an absolute outgrowth of Jewish teachings. When I heard, well, I dare say when we all heard, but when I heard the judge's instructions to us just before we went into deliberations on Wednesday on what we should base our decisions on, I couldn't help but smile inside. So much of American law has its roots in Judaism. So much of what American law holds as important and what a court tries to adjudicate to keep a civil society emanates from our traditions. The case was a medical malpractice case, and the judge said we could speak about everything we wanted to anybody. It was exactly the opposite of the instructions we got during the case. The plaintiff was suing a neurosurgeon. It was an absolute gut-wrenching case. The plaintiff had gone in for surgery. He couldn't lift one of his arms, and the neurosurgeon performed the surgery, and about 10 or 11 days later, developed an exceedingly rare complication, a complication which led to the man being unable to use his arms or his legs. And today he is essentially a quadriplegic. And he and his wife were in the courtroom virtually every day. At this moment, I won't go. I'll keep you in suspense, at least tonight, as to what the jury decided, though the judge, as I said, told us we could speak about this and any aspect of the case to anybody. But what was so impressive is that when we went into deliberations on Wednesday, the seriousness with which the jury took the issues, the desire for clarity, the respect the jurors had both for the system and for one another was impressive. And it was impressive to see how clearly they had listened to the many witnesses, probably half a dozen expert neurosurgeons and neurologists and neuroradiologists and the like. I want to share something a little more personal. As a rabbi, I realize that I represent something more than myself. I represent my temple, Stephen Wise, and I represent in some ways Judaism, just as a priest represents the church. And I take this extraordinarily seriously. I try, though I know I fail. I really try to live up to the standards of Judaism in a way that I act, in a way that I hope will reflect well on our temple and on Judaism. And so I want to share one brief thought about anti-Semitism, which is naturally on the minds today of many people. This was a tiny slice of America, and I acknowledge that what I saw with these jurists was a very tiny slice of America. I think only one of the other jurors was Jewish, and naturally, by the way, she had her bat mitzvah here at Stephen Wise Temple. Found that afterwards. But my sense was that the respect that the other jurists have for Judaism or Jewish law, if you had been sitting in the deliberations and hear the questions, they were interested in Judaism and the way they responded to Judaism and the respect I think so many of them have for Jews, I think you would have had tears in your eyes. And we Jews shouldn't forget that. In fact, sometimes we need to be reminded by people who are not Jewish of just how extraordinary Judaism is. After the verdict was read and we were dismissed and all the jurors left the courtroom, I actually stayed back. I went over to the judge and privately spoke to him. And I shared some of my thoughts about the experience. I mentioned that I was actually contemplating on giving a sermon about it. I wanted to see how he would react, also to see if it was okay. He asked, which synagogue? And I said, Stephen Wise Temple. He's not Jewish. He said, oh, I know all about that place. He certainly knows of us. And by the way, his response to my giving a sermon was, Rabbi, how might I get a chance to hear it? Or even some of your other sermons. I thought he was being polite. I really did. Until he then gave me his personal email address. Perhaps I'll send you the link because I know it's being recorded. I know this, I certainly intend to invite him to lunch or maybe to services here on a Friday night, or maybe even, my wife and sons are here, to Shabbat dinner at our home. Because there's one thing I do know, I can learn a lot from him. Mentioned that I'm a rabbi, I have to tell you, talk to how you shape your thinking. On the third floor, when the trial took place on the fifth floor, but on the third floor, when the elevator would open and people got off, I was so moved because there was a big sign that said, meditation area. And I saw that probably half a dozen times when the doors opened to the elevator and closed. That wasn't the floor that this took place on. It was only until the last day that it opened on the third floor that I realized it didn't say meditation area. It said mediation area. The truth is, this experience reinforced how much I appreciate the contributions that Judaism has made to our American judicial system and how it aspires us to live towards a just and civil society. You know, I have to tell you, it is a very good feeling to be needed. And if you ever feel that you're not needed, you are. Indeed, every single one of us is, to help bring these Jewish ideals to our lives and to our world. Shabbat Shalom.